O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with thee know they are therefore one with every other. Thank you.
On behalf of the Madras Theosophical Federation and Adyar Lodge, I extend a very hearty welcome to all of you today. And first of all, Happy New Year, and also advance Pongal wishes as well. Today, we have with us our International President, Mr. Tim Boyd, who kindly agreed to be with us this evening and give his words of counsel. For those who are in the society and associated with it, and even outside for many, Tim doesn't require any introduction. But today we have many new joinees to the organization, the Theosophical Society. And for their benefit, and those who want to know a little more about Tim, allow me to spend a few moments to introduce Tim Boyd. Mr. Tim Boyd was born in New York in the United States, the same place where the Theosophical Society was established. Of course, our international headquarters is here right now in Adyar. He joined the Theosophical Society. He joined the Theosophical Society in the year 1974, and since then, he has been consistently working for the society, being blessed with many qualities, including that of eloquence. He was the most sought after speaker throughout the places wherever he visited, and he accepted all the invitations, and then he was traveling extensively. He is associated with the Theosophical Order of Service, and he was heading the American wing from 2006 to 2010. Theosophical Order of Service, for your information, those who might want to know, is a wing, an arm of Theosophical Society that aims to alleviate the suffering and pain that is caused upon human mankind, both from natural disasters or even inflicted by man. He was associated with Chushul orphanage in Tibet so much that he had the acquaintance with Dalai Lama, and then he had several meetings that ensured, and he was the large gatherings were also there. He became the president of the Theosophical Society in America, TSA as it is referred, in 2011. And he has been working ever since, and he is actually a chief editor for many publications, editor for journals, magazines, and periodicals. And he became the president of the international president of the Theosophical Society in the year 2014. And ever since, he's been working and traveling extensively, passing on the messages and working for the society in different ways. Several new initiatives were taken up under his leadership. And what is more important is whatever was being done, there was a new dimension. We call it as a transformation, a modernization effort that he has brought to us, that helped a lot, especially in this age that is very much required. He is a very subtle person, very approachable, very friendly to work with, and he seldom says no to requests. And we took advantage of such a quality, kindness perhaps, and then very greedily, very with kind of what you could say selfishness, It's selfishness. We asked him to speak to us today. Selfishness because he just finished an international convention. So taxing it must be, tiresome. For days together, morning to evening, and he himself was presenting. And how many days earlier, days or months earlier, he was actually working on for the event, we don't know. So, Brother Tim, with apologies for this day, and also with a deep sense of gratitude, we would want you to speak to us this evening. Brother Tim, stage is yours.
Well, I'd like to thank Vinay for his generous introduction. I'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you for taking time. Many of you I saw at our recent convention, and the idea that you have the stomach for yet another lecture shows that the convention went well. So I'm very happy to have all of you here. Also to be able to wish you all a happy new year, to those who I have not said it already. Today, I'd like to talk about something, since this is the new year. I'd like to focus a little on something that should be, or is certainly for many of you, an ongoing aspect of your daily lives, which is to talk about practice. A practice that might lead us in the direction of self-transformation, or minimally, in the direction of a less disturbed mind, a healthier body, those sorts of things. There are a lot of stories about Albert Einstein. He's a man who had a comment on pretty much everything, from spirituality to science to politics. Somehow or another, he was one of these people that had a quote for every situation. Story that I heard about him, and I don't know if it's true, but I do like the story. After he had developed his theory of general relativity, all around the world, people were asking him to come and lecture about these matters at universities. And so he made his tour to the United States. And while here, there was a chauffeur that was driving him from place to place to place. And over time, the chauffeur had heard this lecture so many times that at one point he said to Albert Einstein, this next stop, I've heard this lecture so many times, I could give this lecture. Einstein, being tired from the tour, said, sure, go ahead. So they changed hats. Einstein put on the chauffeur hat, and the other man went up to the stage, delivered the lecture flawlessly to university professors and the like. The only issue came up at the end of the talk when one of the professors rose to ask a question. And upon asking this very deep and complicated question, the chauffeur responded, my goodness, such an easy question. Even my chauffeur could answer that question. And he handed it over to Einstein. Sometimes I do believe, again, I like the story, whether it's true or not. But sometimes I do believe in our approach to the wisdom teachings. We become much like this real chauffeur, in the sense that we study, we learn, we can repeat, but the kind of depth of penetration into our consciousness might be lacking. And so always, at least from my perspective, some form of practice, some form of regular behavior that causes these, what begin as concepts and ideas to settle in, is required. There will come a time when practice is really more of an interference. It's just a habit. But until we reach that point, which is probably very far off for most of us, practice is something that is worth going into. Again, Albert Einstein. He made the comment that we must make everything as simple as possible. That applied to his theories, everything. We must make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler. There is that step we can take in this simplification that makes it goes from childlike to childish, where we lose the sense of the meaning. But today, if you will allow me, I'd like to just speak in simple terms, in a language that should be familiar to all of us. And, you can expand upon it as you see fit. But talking about practice, first of all, what is it? What do we mean when we say the word practice? We're very familiar with it from every phase of life. Anyone who's ever been involved in music or sports knows that there is a certain repetitive aspect to it. Where we repeat something to try and develop our skill in action with whatever it is that we're focusing on. In our case for today, we'll be focusing on what we might call a spiritual practice. So practice is this regular and directed activity to develop skill in a particular thing, because it's necessary. In Buddhism, they talk about skillful means, that you can do the right thing, but if you do it in the wrong way, it's not the right thing. So, practice. I don't know if it's a saying that is common here in India. I tend to think that it is. But, in the United States and other places I've been, we have all grown up hearing this idea, particularly from teachers, parents, that practice makes perfect. I see enough heads nodding to feel as if your mothers and fathers have told you the same thing. Practice makes perfect. It's a statement that I really don't agree with, quite honestly. What I would agree with is this: perfect practice makes perfect. I have an example from my own life. I used to be very much involved in sports and was pretty good at it, but there came a time when, you can't get out there and run with the young guys like you used to. So from basketball or football, I changed to tennis because I was sort of naturally athletic. Quickly, for the level I was playing at, I got to be pretty good. At least I thought so. And one particular aspect of my game I noticed was, really kind of good. I had a very fast serve. When you hit the ball. And so what I did was I found that this was something that helped my game, and I practiced it over and over and over again. For a while there, it seemed like my play was improving. But as the summer wore on, I started to notice my shoulder was a little sore. And then I started to notice that I could barely lift my arm. And then, of course, it turned out that my diligent practice, I had been practicing with completely incorrect body mechanics. As a result of my practice towards perfection, I had damaged my rotator cuff in my arm and had to move on to another sport. My budding tennis career never got a chance to take me to Wimbledon. Practice in and of itself is not what makes for perfection, but a perfected practice is what does. So today, what I would really like to talk about, when we think in terms of a practice of a spiritual nature, necessarily it's something that ends up centered on the mind. HPB and others, in speaking about what is a human being, described a human being in this manner, that a human being is highest spirit and lowest matter linked by mind. The mind is the linking agency between the very highest spirit and the lowest of physical matter. Between body and between spirit, there is this intervening bridge of the mind. To me, that's a very important statement, always has been, because it focuses on where it is we need to pay our attention. If, in fact, while living in a body, it at some points becomes something that we feel is of value to connect ourselves with spirit, there's only one avenue through which we can pass, and that's the avenue of the mind. So to me, that would say that each of us needs to give very good attention to the mind. What are its processes? What are its contents? Largely, we function unaware. It's just something we kind of take for granted. It doesn't seem to do us any harm. It gets us around in the course of the day, so we don't go particularly deep into that. During the course of the convention that has just recently ended, on one occasion while I was speaking, I repeated this particular quotation. It's from the Buddha. I wish I could take credit. But the quotation is the very first line from the Dhammapada, the book of the Buddha's sayings. And again, it points our attention in the direction that our practice should focus. He says that all that we are is the result of our thoughts. It's a very strong, it's a very broad, it's a very sweeping statement. All that we are. So I think when we tend to think of ourselves, we have different divisions, different factors that would be who we are. If someone were to ask you, who are you? I should say, if it was not at the Theosophical Society, if it was not in a place where people are focused on the higher self, if someone were to come up to you at the average, as Theosophists, probably you don't do cocktail parties, but some gathering. Oh, who are you? Your introduction might include your nationality. Certainly it would include your name. Depending on where the conversation went, it might talk about your politics, it might talk about your job. Certainly it will talk about your job because we identify with that quite strongly. But Buddha takes another tack on this question of who we are in saying that all that we are is the result of our thoughts. So what level of consideration have we given to that? And I think all of us have, but I don't think it's a bad thing, particularly since this is the beginning of yet another new year, for us to once again take a look at it and examine what we mean even when we talk about our thoughts and our thought process. Again, in the interest of speaking simply, not too simply, but simply, I'll offer you an example. Just before coming here to Adyar, my wife, my daughter, and I, we were with her family in Singapore. And Singapore is a very, very developed city and country. And probably it has one of the best transportation systems in the world. But thoughts. For most of us, thoughts come in, we attach ourselves to a particular thought, we jump on board just like we board a bus, we take it a little ways, we get off, and switch to the next thought. Beautiful thing in Singapore, any bus stop you go to, there are going to be 4 or 6 or even 8 different buses that stop at that one. Each one can take you in a different direction. With our thoughts, generally, at least until we have paid some attention to it and have done something in terms of becoming aware of the process of thought and how it affects us, it's just like these buses. You get on a bus, and the bus might be, what I have to do at work today. And you ride it. After a while, that thought kind of peters out and you get off, get on the next one. That thought is, what I have to do when I get home. The grocery list, the laundry, the dishes. We ride that one for a ways. Get off, there's another bus waiting for us. Oftentimes, it's somebody else's thought. We get back home, turn on the news. Somebody's telling us, it's always telling us about some catastrophic and violent occurrence somewhere in the world. We get on that bus. Next thing you know, you're feeling a little bit frightened. You're feeling disturbed. The world seems to be not quite so friendly as it was a little bit earlier. But it's just like one thought after another in a largely uncontrolled manner. So I was just thinking today, a bus system, our thoughts, we're constantly riding them. We would tell ourselves that this is what we call thinking. But probably, if ever we get to the point where we can examine it more closely, we'll find that the thoughts that are arising are not of our choosing. We're just getting on board and magnifying them. We talk about it to others, and it becomes magnified. The way this thing works, keeping with our little bus analogy, which I kind of like, honestly, the way it works, riding on whatever particular stream of thought it is, there could be a mountain of gold outside of that bus. But unless it's at one of these designated stops for that particular thought, we miss it. For us, it doesn't exist. So when we talk about practice, really all I'm talking about is getting off of the bus. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean, how we might do that. Stepping off of the bus, not to step on the other one that is waiting there for us always. You step off the bus, get off of that thought. And standing at the bus stop, watch one bus come and let it go. Let another one come, let it go. So the process begins with this choice to step out of the stream that is pushing us along unconsciously. And we can do that. So when we do that, we start to find that we can observe the various thoughts. That's one of the ways it begins, where you see the thought coming. You see the number 18 bus coming. You watch it stop. You see the people that are crowded in there, and you let it go, one after another. With some time and practice, it gets to the point where, we're familiar with the way these buses move, and then we start to become more aware of our greater surroundings, of the non-bus world. And in spiritual teachings around the world, one of the points that they make is this. Again, they don't use the bus analogy, but buses weren't available when Buddha was teaching, so maybe he would have used it too. But what they will tell you is this, that sometimes when we stop in this manner, when we stand in this manner, when we become aware of our surroundings in this manner, at this very bus stop where we got off, there will be others that we can connect with. There will be others who might be able to say something to you that can point you in a direction that can be very beneficial. point to the bus line, the particular line of thought that can be expansive and can be transformative if you follow it to the end of the line. And we will go with that. This is what is spoken of very often as practice. Great souls have come into this world to try to indicate a direction, and along with that have given tools to arrive at that destination. As we deepen in this, we start to become aware that either in our study or somehow or another, we come into contact with great souls who will be able to tell you about a particular bus, a particular line of thought and practice that can lead you to a different sort of destination, that can lead you to the very borders of what you might describe as a pathless land. Upon arriving at such a place, you find that the uses of the bus are superfluous, no longer necessary, because from that point onward, you have to make your way on foot. The great ones can tell you how to get there, but then having arrived, having listened carefully, having learned to follow in terms of the wisdom teachings, then we find ourselves exposed to something that requires an awareness and a consciousness that cannot be poured into us, cannot be trained. This is the idea of practice. What I'd really like to share, too, along that line, a specific, very simple practice. One that can be as simple or as deep as you choose to make it. And it's one that was also, it was emphasized by the Buddha, although it was something that existed before his time. The way the story goes, on a particular occasion, a Brahmin came to the Buddha, and he had a very specific request, something he wanted to ask of him. And what he needed to know was this. He wanted to know if the Buddha could give him a particular practice that would assure that this Brahmin would be born into the Brahma heaven world, the heaven world of Brahma. And although it has a certain selfish element to it, that request, the Buddha responded, of course, I can tell you exactly. And he went on to teach him a very simple practice that was called the Brahma Viharas, the dwelling places, the Viharas of Brahma. And it was very simple. It's also called the four minds, the four immeasurable minds, are other names for this same very simple practice. And so what are these four dwelling places of Brahma? And this is something that maybe during the rest of the little time that we have together, I'd like to go into that a little bit more, just to describe a little bit of its depth, and then you choose where you'd like to approach it, or not. Basically, these four minds are described as the mind of love or loving kindness, the mind of compassion, the mind of joy, sometimes called empathetic joy, and the mind of equanimity. Simple words. So let's start with the first one, the mind of love or loving kindness. The way the practice works, and it's to some degree a visual practice, but it's all about calling a deeper thought to mind. All of these great beings who tried to point us in a certain direction, with St. Paul, with J. Krishnamurti, you have these words where they say, think on these things. That was a book from Krishnamurti. Prior to his book, it was also a line from the Bible, where St. Paul advised people who wanted to have the experience of the Christ within, start by thinking on these things. You know, what's true, what's good, what's beautiful, what's lovely, what's honest, those sorts of things. So love was this first immeasurable mind. Love, from a Buddhist perspective, the way it's said is, may all beings have happiness. So from a Buddhist perspective, when you talk about the meaning of love, basically it relates to this idea that every being that lives, from an ant to a human being, desires happiness for itself. It's a fundamental idea. And again, you think about it for yourself. If it's something you find is not true, I'd like to hear about it. But everything that lives wants happiness for itself. So the immeasurable mind that says, may all beings have happiness, is the mind of love. Now, it's not my phone. Oh, it's yours. I have to say that's a first. So the mind of love is really the mind that wishes happiness for all beings. So, you know, that's something we can say yes, nod our heads to, because of course we know exactly what happiness is, do we? When, you know, it's a simple word that we use in everyday conversation. We have an idea, certainly, of what it means. But I would say this. In the little book, At the Feet of the Master, it lists 4 qualifications for us to be open to a process of self-transformation. The second one of those is called desirelessness. Vairagya is its, if I'm not mistaken, it's Sanskrit term for it. Desirelessness. And in that little book, the statement is made that this probably is the most difficult of all of the qualifications for any of us, because we feel that in some way we are inextricably bound to the things we desire. It's hard to separate. I desire, you know, a good life for my daughter and for my family. You know, where do I separate from that desire? Many of us want the perfect job, the perfect situation, the perfect mate. We have these desires. But what then? We associate desire very closely with this whole happiness idea. Because when these desires are fulfilled, all of us have observed that when whatever the desire that we have had is fulfilled, is satisfied, we feel happy. Whether it's about the meal we have been looking forward to, the vacation we have desired, the job we have coveted, the moment that that desire becomes satisfied, there is this sensation of happiness. And I think many people associate very closely happiness with, you know, satisfaction of desire. And so, you know, the way to be more happy is to have more desires that you then satisfy in this never-ending spiral of want. But I would suggest that perhaps that's not completely correct. What is a desire? Might also be a good question. You know, I would describe a desire as, a desire is a thought chasing after a sensation or a feeling. So maybe let me go into that one. So a desire, how does it form? You know, each of us has these 5 senses, you know, the sensations. They're basically the windows that open us out to the world. We experience the world at a very fundamental level through touch, taste, sight, smell, sound, and whatever the other fifth one I left out. That's the normal way that we experience the world. In Eastern spirituality, it's spoken of as the organs of knowledge, the yanandriyas. And so it's the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the hand that are spoken of as the organs of knowledge. So through these organs that reach out and touch and experience the world, sensations flow. And the experience of sensations in and of itself is not a desire. You know, sensations are either going to be pleasurable. You know, if it's nice and warm and it's cold outside, that's a pleasurable sensation. Here in Adyar, it's the opposite. On those very hot days when you step into an air-conditioned room, that's a pleasurable sensation. But pleasure, pain, is what the senses provide us. But based on that, there's no desire. What we do find is that it goes one step deeper. And based on the pleasurable experience, the painful experience, the next step is we become attached to the one, and we push the other away. You know, attachment and aversion is our response to all of this. And so, at that level, it is not yet a desire. It's an emotional response to sensation. But a certain thing happens where it becomes something we can name as a desire. What happens is this, that with this sensation, with this feeling of pleasure, of pain, the mind becomes engaged. The thinking process becomes called into action. And it's called into action to satisfy the desire, what is now a desire, for a repetition of an experience, or a magnification of an experience, or the prevention of an experience that we really didn't like. And at that point, we talk about desire, because at that point, every aspect of the personality has involved itself in this process. The physical, the emotional, the mental processes are all involved in seeking out and satisfying. So, this is when we have this desire that seems to drive us. So here's the thing. When it comes to this, you know, often I'll use the example of ice cream. You know, you get it in your mind that somehow you want an ice cream cone on a hot day. You figure out how to get a ride to the ice cream shop. You get your money, you go there. When you get there and you get the cone of your choice and you put it in your mouth and that cool sensation fills you, at that moment, for most people, they would say, okay, this is a happy moment. The desire has gone away. And so really, what I would put forward is this. In our thinking about happiness, and you think it through for yourselves, this whole thing of desire and desirelessness, happiness is a byproduct of the condition of a mind that is, even temporarily, freed from the wheel and the impulse of desire. But in this practice that the Buddha recommended, the step that we take, again, it helps to have some kind of understanding, but the step that we take is to say this. In our minds, in our imaginations, we call to mind all beings. It's a very expansive practice. And obviously, we will have difficulty calling to mind all beings. So we do what we can. But the wish is, may all beings have happiness. That's the first mind. the first immeasurable mind, the first dwelling place of Brahma. So the second one is compassion. Love is first, then comes compassion. So again, the mind of compassion is one that says, may all beings be free from suffering. You know, the first noble truth of the Buddha was the truth of suffering. You know, the basic idea is that anyone who is living in a body experiences suffering in different degrees and at different levels. So the wish is that all beings may be free from suffering. And in Buddhist thought, there is this way of viewing compassion, that compassion is the desire to relieve the suffering of others. It's very straightforward. So when we are compassionate, we are engaged in relieving the suffering of others. We have another statement that we encounter for those who are involved in study of the Theosophical stream of the ageless wisdom, where it is said about compassion that compassion is no mere attribute. It is the law of laws. Another very grand, very sweeping statement. Compassion is the law of laws. I've said this before because I know just for me, you know, if you've gone to 5 Theosophical lectures, you've probably heard this said at least twice, probably 3 times, that compassion is the law of laws. And I do know in my early time, acquainting myself with this body of the wisdom teachings, I would ask myself, why? You know, what makes compassion the law of laws? How is it a law beyond gravity, beyond karma, beyond any of the other laws we're aware of? And it took a while. At least for me. Probably most of you are much quicker to the point than I was. But the idea being, when we examine what is happening when we are compassionate, first of all, it requires us to be able to perceive the suffering of another. You know, in order to do that, you have to get beyond just your own suffering. And you perceive where someone other than you is experiencing suffering. So in a sense, this very first step in the direction of compassion requires us to move beyond just this selfish center that somehow has become so hardened and been cultivated for so long. So this first step, we move beyond ourselves, and our consciousness and our caring embraces another. So it's expansive. The idea is that's what happens with one person. For the normal person, you know, you are compassionate certainly to members of our families, you know, our immediate circle. It's very easy to have compassion for our daughters, our sons, our mothers, our grandparents. We can extend in that way quite comfortably, normally. And that tends to define the normal circle of most people. When we look at the lives of people we might describe as great beings, as people who really demonstrated a caring for others, the scope of their embrace is always something that is ever widening. Sometimes I take the example of Mahatma Gandhi. He was, he started his life to becoming Mahatma Gandhi as Mohandas Gandhi, who was a British-trained lawyer who happened to find himself living in South Africa and who was indignant about the mistreatment that was received by the Indian population there, and began his campaigns based on that. Not so much out of a grand compassion, or not so much out of an all-embracing love, but out of an indignation at an injustice was his humble beginnings. As he progressed with this work, and as he became aware that he was connecting with something much deeper, eventually he came to India. And there he embraced a larger spectrum of humanity. The people he was working on behalf of became the population of the Indian subcontinent that was being pressed down under the colonial heel of the British Empire. And this sense of compassion expanded. When you take the case of those truly great beings, the avatars, the messiahs, the Buddhas of the world who come periodically, their scope is universal. There is no one who stands outside the range of their compassion. So this compassion as the law of laws, over time, has dawned on me as really an expression. This law of laws is essentially the law of oneness, undivided. And this mind of compassion is one of the avenues that is presented to us to move toward this degree of universality, hidden within all of us, but present in these, even in this simple practice. If we can walk along this way, if we can follow this thing to its destination, what lies at the end of every one of these routes is unity. So compassion is the second of these immeasurable minds. The third one is described as joy, or sympathetic joy. And, just to be a little bit quick with that one, again, the wish is expressed in the exact same way, which is to say, may all beings have joy. And I do believe, too, that with joy we is very closely allied with our concept of happiness. Now, how is happiness any different from joy? It's clearly something that is nuanced, but the way the nuance is expressed in Buddhist thinking, again, is that joy, happiness is this thing that involves desire at many levels. Joy is something that is more of a pure and more of a mental, a phenomenon of the mind. A couple of examples they give. One of them is the example of a thirsty man or woman stranded in the desert and almost dying of thirst. This thirsty person looks up, and in the distance they see an oasis with palm trees and flowing water. The oasis is a mirage. It's not something that has any real existence. But on seeing this oasis, the mind and the sense that arises within that thirsty person is what we would describe as joy. You get that? Whether it's something that is a real thing that's going to satisfy the thirst or not. So it's more of a mental phenomenon, and in that sense, it's ever available. And then the fourth of these, immeasurable minds, is what's called the mind of equanimity. Equanimity, which basically equanimity means a certain stability, even in the middle of all of the various fluctuations of life. So to be able to have this mind that isn't thrown off center by the latest breeze that blows difficult news into our ears is the state of equanimity. It's spoken as, may all beings have equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. In Buddhist thinking again, and in other spiritual traditions, there is the idea of the Dharma. So the wisdom teachings, the teachings that lead toward enlightenment, are often spoken of as the Dharma. So in Buddhism, they speak about worldly dharmas. There's a spiritual dharma, but there are also worldly dharmas, which they identify 8 worldly dharmas. So 8 pathways that people follow almost religiously that are linked to all of the different changes that they experience in the world. It's always, for me, it's a difficult matter to say, list a list of 8 different things. But I've been able to do it by rhyming them. And I think even the people I know who are profound Buddhists don't object to these rhymes. So what are the 8 worldly dharmas? First would be pleasure, and then, of course, its opposite, pain. So you can't have one without the other. They talk about fame, and then the opposite side of that same coin is shame. Just look at any newspaper to hear about the latest politician's fall from grace, and you know that this famous person is now being publicly shamed. And it's part of the Dharma of this world. They talk about praise and blame. Just as surely as you'll be praised, someone on the next street corner is blaming you. I have personal experience with these matters. I'm the international president of the Theosophical Society. Praise, along with it comes blame. It's the nature of the way we function in this world. And then loss and gain, obvious ones. But these are what are spoken of as the worldly dharmas, that when we ask, may all beings have equanimity, that there is a certain ability to stand as these various waves break across your mind, across your consciousness. So those are the 4 immeasurable minds: love, compassion, joy. There was a second example with joy that I need to share, because just a thirsty man in the desert isn't quite enough. The second example for joy is thinking in terms of empathetic joy. So a joy that goes out, that arises for the accomplishments and goodness you see in others. And the example that's given for that is of the parent who feels filled with so much joy at the successes and at the happiness of their children. I had an opportunity to witness this firsthand just the other day with a certain convention officer's mother. The pride, the joy that comes from witnessing the expansion of another is another form of this joy. But anyway, four minds that form a part of a practice. The practice can be just as simple as calling these things to mind on a regular basis, or it can be as deep as going into any one of them and pursuing it to its depths regularly. You know, what is the meaning, not just of love, but what does it mean for me in my own mind to try and visualize all beings as possessed of this love that is the root of happiness? It calls on us in a way to imagine. And I always like to distinguish, because a lot of people, when you start talking about imagining, it seems very unreal. You know, you're stepping off into a land that doesn't really fit here in this world. But there's nothing that exists in this world that was not first imagined. Nothing. The clothes we wear, the chairs we sit on, nothing. And it even extends into the creation and the appearance of beings, of worlds, of universes. There is a deeper imagining that brings those things into being. So we engage in this process of imagining. May all beings have happiness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings have joy. May all beings dwell in equanimity, free from attachment, free from aversion. For those of you who are more familiar with the Theosophical perspective, which this is, there probably many of you might be aware of a very small one-page document. The principal founder of the Theosophical Society, H.P. Blavatsky, she wrote thousands of pages, but during all of the different things that she wrote, there was not an awful lot said about the process of meditation. Meditation was mentioned frequently in all of its benefits, but how do you do it was something that was rarely mentioned. But there's a small, really small document, very abstract in some ways, but it's called the Diagram of Meditation. And I'm not going to go into the little diagram itself, but the very first words of it say something about the meditative process that we can engage in approaching this practice of these four minds. What she says there is, first, conceive of unity. The first step in the meditative process. First, conceive of unity by expansion in space and infinite in time. That's the line. In the practice of these four minds, it begins with may all beings. Human beings, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the insect kingdom, the kingdom of the gods, may all beings have happiness, compassion, freedom from suffering, joy. Expansion in space. So obviously there's a lot more that can be said, but I would encourage each of you, if you find it something that is of value, to try it for yourselves, to add that to your bag of things that you do during this new year, so that at some new year, very distant from this one, we can meet each other at that borderland to this pathless land and find that these thoughts, these practices have actually been instrumental, have been powerful in moving us from where we are now, our divided and isolated norm, to something that we all know somehow exists, but feel as if perhaps it's beyond us. It begins somewhere. So that's about what I have for you today. I do appreciate you coming out. Thank you very much for being attentive. Sorry I couldn't turn this way more, but it's, it's just the way it works. Thank you.
In information technology perspective, there is a term called design thinking, which is adopted for embracing innovation and disruption from regular process, which leads to simplification and enhanced customer experience. Mr. Tim Boyd adopts that not only for his administrative purposes, but also in his thought process, delivering his speeches every time. So I'm sure elderly people who are here would agree with me that he actually touched based upon very deeper subjects of theosophy mentioned not only in ancient scriptures, but also one thing that constantly came to mind, which is Patanjali Yoga Sutras. He was very cognitive of the new comers here and didn't want to complicate quoting, but we know. So what I mean is simplification, so that your experience is enhanced without being distracted too much. So I am sure you will all agree with me that, and you will all thank me for mine and our office bearers' selfishness for having him today with us, and we cannot thank him more than ever for he being with us, for in spite of all of his past exercise and in the convention, and also the various schedules that he has on hand. In spite of it, he'd agreed kindly to be with us today. So we would end with a prayer, and I would request K. Jayashri, Uma Patri, and Samanvita Patri to come and give the prayer for us.
The song, Maitrim Bhajata, we are about to sing, is closely associated with ideals of Theosophical society. It is a prayer for universal peace, the need of the heart, and it is also the prayer for the people of the world to be happy and prosperous. Now the song.
Maitrim Bhajata Akhilah Jetrim, Maitrim Bhajata Akhilah Jetrim, Maitrim Bhajata Akhilah Jetrim. Atmavadeva Paranapi Pashyata, Atmavadeva Paranapi Pashyata, Yuddham Tyajata, Spardham Tyajata, Yuddham Tyajata, Spardham Tyajata, Tyajata Pareshu Kramamakramanam, Tyajata Pareshu Kramamakramanam, Maitrim Bhajata Akhilah Jetrim, Maitrim Bhajata Akhilah Jetrim. Janani Prithvi कामधुगास्ते जननी पृथ्वी कामधुगास्ते जनको देवः सकलदयालु जनको देवः सकलदयालु दाम्यतदत्त दयद्वं जनता दाम्यतदत्त दयद्वं जनता श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां.
Thank you. The meeting is closed.